Nice.
So what are we talking about today? Fit versus
Hey,
healthy?
exactly.
All
What am
right.
I feeling today?
Right. Jay's gonna take his shirt off.
Yeah, well, that's part of fit. That's usually where you can see like abs and stuff like that, or ab,
Yes.
maybe.
Thank you.
I shouldn't say
Thank you.
plural, but
Isn't that called skinny fat?
Skinny fat. Yeah. Can you say that?
if you're interested in dissolving the origins of disease, finding solutions to your health problems, and living a full, meaningful, joyful life, then make sure you tune in for your weekly vitality check. Each week, the team from Vitality Multi-Therapy unpacks illness and explores what it truly means to be healthy. Join us as we usher in a new paradigm in healing and take a multi-perspective approach to the myriad of challenges that we face in our modern world. Together, we will go well outside the limited box of conventional medicine and find answers and solutions that put you back in the driver's seat of your own health and your life. Buckle up, join us on this journey, and let's make sure to have a little fun along the way.
Welcome back to the Vitality Check podcast.
Different. Do it different. I didn't like
Welcome
that.
back to the Vitality Check podcast. Here again with Dr. Jason Loken and another doctor, Dr. Sean Landry, is in the
Oh,
house.
two doctors.
Two
Wow.
doctors and two others, Kevin Landry
We
and
are
Jason Turnbull.
C
Glad to
and
be
D.
here.
C and D.
The B team.
Yeah.
The B team.
Yeah.
So glad to be here, boys, like always.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful day here in Montreal.
Mm.
Nice, great to have everybody here. Great to have you here, Sean.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today, guys.
No problem.
Yeah.
Very happy to
Anytime you want to come on, Sean. Nice.
So what are we talking about today? Fit versus
Hey.
healthy?
Exactly.
All
What
right.
am I feeling today?
Right. Jay's gonna take his shirt off.
Yeah, well, that's part of fit. That's usually where you can see like abs and stuff like that, or ab,
Yes.
maybe.
Thank you.
I shouldn't say
Thank you.
plural, but
Isn't that called skinny fat?
Skinny fat. Yeah.
Can you say that?
Yeah. No, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
know. At least you
Essentially,
did.
What is
You-
the difference,
you did.
right?
He
So,
did say it.
yeah.
I did.
It's out
Sorry.
there.
It's on video too. So sorry, Jay.
That's all right. No worries. Yeah, we're just looking at what are the differences because sometimes these terms get kind of thrown around, right? And interchangeably, but they're not really the case, right?
Mhm.
So I guess we can kind of define what we think healthy versus fit are. And then maybe we can talk about some of the indicators of what makes someone being fit and what are the indicators of being healthy. And that might help differentiate for people what those differences really are, right? So maybe we'll start with fitness, for instance. So fitness for some people, like we said, interchangeable is not really like that, right? So you can be fit, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily healthy, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
so I think the big thing when you look at fit is like their physical conditioning, their physical health, their physical activity. Like you're looking at fitness, I think, more than you're looking at health, right? Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think when you think of fit, usually I think of it primarily around like related to usually athletic performance. Like you usually can do certain feats maybe better and better the fitter that you get. I usually think of it as around, lean. Like I said, usually you can see abs and stuff like that. Like I think of that more as fitness, but you can be really fit and actually be really unhealthy. A lot of people, right? So you might look good on paper, or the picture looks good, and you can actually even perform certain feats well, but you might have a lot of other markers that we can go down the road here we'll talk about. But there's different markers, I would say, specifically around health versus fitness. And then I think there's some that overlap, where it's like if you get a few key ones on board, they will help with your fitness, but they will also be very important for your overall health.
So it's almost like those bodybuilders when they go into competition. They're super
Right.
jacked, super fit, but probably very unhealthy by what they put their body through.
Yeah, their blood work might not look that great.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Or even like marathon runners or something you'd see
Yeah.
too, right? They can
Context.
perform this crazy feat, but you can run into other problems. And I would even say a big one's even like been some cardiovascular stuff, particularly with marathon runners, being that fit in that area may not be healthy in a lot of other aspects of your life.
So overtrained, right? You could be overtrained and without looking at all aspects of what makes someone healthy, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, and depleted, therefore, right? If you're focusing on one thing and one thing only, you're sacrificing other things. Right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and you would see one thing I would find a lot of times would be I'd get people coming in that were working out, say, a lot. So they looked really good, like they were lean. They they were strong, they could do a lot of these things. But then what you'd start to find would be, especially when it's gone too far, because sometimes working out a lot, or like even an athletic performance, when you're doing it a lot, sometimes that eventually starts to become stressful on the body, right? So you start to see maybe more wear and tear. You're creating more inflammation. I would find sometimes you even see this with like a lot of like real long distance runners. They actually start to build a little bit of belly fat around there that they can't get rid of, right? So something's off. That's now where your fitness level is starting to affect your overall health. Something else needs to be checked out and changed.
You'll see it often with people that are obsessed with working out and stuff like that too. Like Sean was saying, alluding to the fact that they're overtraining, and then you'll see it when they come in the office. You look at every other spec in terms of health, and they don't sleep well, they don't digest well, they're not recovering. So all these are indicators too that the person is either overdoing it and or not putting the right elements into their fitness and overall health to be optimal.
Oh yeah, we all know runners like that too, right? They run, but God forbid they miss a running day, right? Because if they miss that one day, it blows their whole day apart. It's no longer a good day for them. So you can see that there's a psychological component to that as well, right? Which is unhealthy.
100%.
Well, that would be a big part of health. When you think about health, it's like, I think, are all of your different systems actually running pretty effectively? Because you could be pretty fit, but you could be waking up exhausted. You could have aches and pains. Like you said, your bowels could be totally off, or your digestion could be a mess. There's lots of those things that could be off, but
hormonally.
Yeah. And a lot of times that does happen with the overtraining. So I would look at systems like this is where we talked about in one of the other episodes, we talked about determinants of health. I always think that's a really good way to go back to sort of get an overall picture of where am I from a health standpoint. So, and it doesn't cost you anything. It just causes you to reflect a little bit at the end of your day. It's like, how were my bowel movements? How many did I have? Were they formed properly? What was my stress level like? How was my mood? How was my sleep? Like just look at some of these markers and see how you're doing. And if you're tracking that regularly, even if you can, run 10K in, 35 minutes or something, but you've got all these other markers going off, you got to kind of relook at that and decide, like, is this actually supportive, or do I need to do some other things? And Jay, you mentioned around mental health. That's a huge component of overall health. And I would agree, a lot of times the hard training becomes kind of like the crux that if it's not there, their mental health starts to really go. It's like, that was my stress relief. And that's usually when you're riding right up against the threshold. And if you missed your day and everything goes to crap, usually you got to pull some other logs out of the fire.
Seriously. Yeah, so I mean, maybe we can talk about maybe some other things that determine fitness. So before we move on to healthy and what that entails, we didn't really define maybe fitness as well. So we talked about a few of them, right? We talked about like good muscle strength, right? That's one for fitness, good muscle endurance, good flexibility, a low body fat percentage, high VO2 max, like all these things. I think you said that, Jay, at the start. These are like athletic performance stuff, right? Like things that low resting heart rate, good reaction time. That's what I think about for fitness is very much geared towards athleticism or sports really in general, right?
Yeah.
Dart players with their precise stuff, right?
Fit dart players.
Dart players.
Highly precise tuned instruments.
Yes.
So that's what I think is
Accuracy.
the big thing, whereas health, we'll get into some of the health ones, is not that at all, really. Well, not that at all. That's a small component of the overall picture.
Yeah, I think the ones that overlap well would be, like weight. Like a lot of people, if they're a little bit overweight, even just losing, like dropping 5% of your total body weight makes a huge impact on overall health. So it doesn't even have to be a lot. Even like 5%, that's it. So it doesn't take very much to have a big impact on your overall health. I would say also strength. If you're improving strength, you're also usually related to improving overall health, because that affects a lot of different areas in your body, and probably improving cardio too. Yeah, absolutely.
Age, right?
It's a big marker for it.
At the age of 35.
Bone density.
Exactly.
What are some of the classic, actually, let's go there. What are some of the classic biomarkers that we actually look for? Like what, to determine,
for health,
almost this blend for fitness and health, like what would be some of the standardized ones right now?
How I usually look at it is, I think Jay mentioned a lot of the fitness ones. So it's like the fitness ones I think are kind of specific that way. The health ones, I would look at those overlapping ones, like the losing weight, improving strength, improving cardio. And then I always go to, I want to know subjectively how people are doing, how they're feeling, but as well as the objective markers that come in with those determinants of health. So they're just getting a baseline first. After that, then I would say there's specific things that I think are good markers that you can do on your own. So checking blood pressure, I think, is a good marker, that you're in that optimal zone around things. Waist to hip ratio, probably a really good overall marker for people. And it doesn't cost you anything, like really it means like your waist should not be bigger than your hips, but that's a big marker for cardiovascular. It's much better than a lot of the other ones, better than weight by itself. And BMA kind of sucks. BMA is really not a very good one. I mean, a lot of times people that are quite muscular have high BMIs and they're told that they're obese. But a waist to hip ratio is a good one. Men should be below 0.9, women should be below 0.8. So that's a good marker for people too. And then if you're trying to do like a panel, there's literally umpteen million types of tests you can do from a functional med perspective. But what I like to look at as a big picture one, the one book I did, the top 10 lab tests, breaks down some of the key nutritional biomarkers because they don't usually get tested and they're usually out of balance for a lot of people. And those tie into that functional zone problems. It's like if those things are out of balance, they're usually related to so many other problems because they're the cofactors that make sure that all these biochemical reactions run smoothly for hundreds and hundreds of them. So I would check nutritional biomarkers. I would look at cardiovascular risk biomarkers because I think those are huge. Really inexpensive. Adaptability to stress you could do too. So
like cortisol levels, things like that.
That would get into like some hormone testing you'd probably have to do because some of that stuff in blood tests, they don't really show up until they're really a big problem. So you'd have to do that. Wouldn't be a blood test. You'd have to do probably like a dried urine test or some certain saliva panels could be okay for that. I think assessing fatty acid ratios is really important too because these are big things that a lot of people are out of balance with. So I would test like athletes for a while when I was in clinic. And again, super fit. But when I would look at like certain nutritional markers, I'd look at fatty acid ratios. It's like they're totally out of balance unless they're aware of it and they're doing something with it. But if your fatty acid ratios, like your omega-6 and 3 are really out of balance, you're setting yourself up for a lot of long-term inflammation. And you wouldn't totally know other than the symptoms of like, oh, I'm getting more aches and pains, or maybe I'm getting tendonitis a lot more frequently and I can't get rid of it, or some of these types of things, or skin changes.
So exactly. So like hiked inflammation is one of the major markers, right, of not being healthy, right?
Yeah.
So that would be a big thing to discuss, right? Is to know what are the signs, like you said. So like someone's that's super achy all the time, joint pain, a different functioning of the digestive system that doesn't work well, the skin, all these things that could be huge indicators that you have an inflammatory problem that is really a lot of the cause of why even the immune system is taking a beating, right? So I think inflammation is probably one of the big ones, like you said, with the balancing of the omegas and everything else too, which can help tremendously when we talk about solutions, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
You think like if we're going to do testing, like you got into specific testing, you think like like a lipid panel, right? Their triglycerides, their cholesterol stuff. I think that'd be pretty accurate to get a look at that. I think blood sugar is another one that's big for people if they're especially like middle age when they could be maybe pre-diabetic. We see a lot of my clientele is like that 35 to 55-year-old range. That's a big one for people when you can tell they're not doing well and they're not feeling themselves.
Yeah. And they're gradually sneaking up weight every year. It's kind of going up. And some of those is like blood sugar is a good marker, like a hemoglobin A1C, which is more of like a long-term measurement over about 3 months to see how you're looking for blood sugar. That easily starts to sneak up, and that's usually more diet lifestyle related to get it back down. I think that's a good marker. I like looking at insulin levels, so I would look at a fasting insulin because I think that also tells me if you are fat adapted, which I think is a really important one for both fitness and for health as well, as being able to be fat adapted, meaning like that your body can use sugar for energy when it needs to, Like that's like more your, high intensity intervals, that kind of stuff, and more like people that do a lot of sport, like soccer or tennis or whatever, they have to go into that anaerobic metabolism where they burn sugar because that's that fast fuel. But if you're doing that too much and you're not eating in a way to support the body properly, you can get kind of stuck in that metabolism. And then you actually have a hard time accessing fats for fuel when you really need them. And that's when people kind of go, what the hell? I'm going to the gym all the time and I'm doing HIIT training and I'm doing all this stuff. And it's like, I've still got this belly fat here and it's not going. One of the reasons can be that you are now not fat adapted. Your body is getting so used because you're either in high stress all the time, you're not eating in a way that supports fat metabolism, that now you're kind of stuck in burning sugar. So then if you're not burning sugar, you get cravings, and then you can go on this sort of roller coaster ride. So I think a lot of times getting back into a zone where your body can be metabolically fit, meaning like you can switch between the type of fuel source, I think that goes a long way for people too.
Okay. So bringing it back. So we have a lot of testing that we can do, but what, again, you kind of classified. So someone, the listener, for themselves, the things that they should be monitoring themselves. So you said, like sleep, and now we have apps to do that. You said looking at your stool, your digestion. I guess it's just being aware of your waist to hip ratio. And then I'm saying, we mentioned a lot of tests. A listener would be like, well, that's a lot of things. What do I do? Where do I start? Right. Obviously they want to go and see a professional who can guide them if they want to take a deeper dive into health. But coming back, like basics, what should they be aware of? And then if they do feel that there's something off and they want to seek professional help, what's the next level? What would be entry points?
Dr. Jason Logan talked.
Yeah. Or if they just want to get a baseline. Sometimes I think people just want to be aware of, like, because a lot of this stuff if you see it in advance, you can mitigate stuff like cardiovascular markers. So Jay, you mentioned cholesterol. I'll come back to the beginning of that in just one sec, Sean. But cholesterol, we're often told, is such an important one and all these kind of things. I mean, the reality is there's a much bigger story tied to cholesterol on whether how much cholesterol itself actually is related to cardiovascular risk. I think there's other markers that are much more important to check to really assess your cardiovascular risk, that are cheap and do not cost you very much, and they're pretty extensive. So you could look at your overall cholesterol panel just to give you a picture. But you would need someone to look at the whole thing and then walk you through it properly so you know what the pieces mean. It's more than just total cholesterol. Some people can have high total cholesterol, but it might be higher because they've got a lot of good cholesterol, right? So their cholesterol to HDL ratio actually looks very protective. I've seen that with lots of different patients where they're like, oh, you need to be on a statin, your cholesterol is getting high. And it's like, when you look at it, it's high because they've got a lot of good cholesterol. That's actually very protective, cardioprotective. So cholesterol can be one piece of it, but I would look at, from a cardiovascular standpoint, look at an hsCRP, which is a high sensitivity C-reactive protein. That's giving you a very specific marker for inflammation, and even inflammation, particularly more in the arterial wall. I would look at something like a lipoprotein A, which is also a marker for cardiovascular risk. And I look at a homocysteine. I think those three give you a really good picture of if you are increasing your risk, you can basically mitigate up to like 10 years before it ever becomes a problem. So if you know that stuff's there, then you can do things to start to reverse it, and then re-look at them again to see that you're getting back down into safe zones. And they are markers for cardiovascular risk, but they also tie into other stuff in the body, global inflammation, like you were talking about, Kevin. And homocysteine also is a pathway that eventually comes down and makes glutathione. So it gives you an idea of where you might be out of balance with specific pathways. Where I always start with people is, I think, if depending on where your budget is for testing and stuff, if you don't have a budget, track those things like your blood pressure, your waist to hip ratio, and go through the determinants of health, the ones that we kind of brought up the picture on, I think, in one of the other episodes we did. That just monitor that. Just start to get it's almost like you're being honest with where you're even at, because a lot of these things we don't even think about. So I think if you just start by monitoring and just tracking, kind of going, geez, I'm only getting 5 hours of sleep every night, and I'm kind of feeling sort of tired every day, and my stress seems to be up at like an 8 or a 9 all the time, and and you just start to see trends. I think that's the very first part, is just where are you? Take a good look at it. Doesn't cost you anything, but it gives you good markers. And if those things are changing with just making diet and lifestyle adjustments, you're probably on the right track. If people want to take a more comprehensive look, then usually what I would do is I run a couple of panels. So I would run a key nutrient and biomarker panel where I look at a lot of the key nutrients, plus I would look at certain inflammation markers and stuff like that. That would be sort of a panel of blood work. That might cost people maybe $150 or something. It's not that crazy.
Not to cut you off, but I like what you're saying about the lifestyle bit too, because when people have this inability to handle stress, or they look at their lives and they see like the stress on the body causing these biological changes in the body. If they can actually take a quick look, that's one easy way to start, is looking like, okay, what are some things that I could maybe cut out that are going to relieve some stress, number one. And it's not to avoid stress, obviously, like we've talked about even in the resiliency podcast, but it is really to manage it properly, so that one, maybe you have something in place to help you deal with it better, but also maybe you avoid the ones that are clearly not necessary. And that's a good way to start too, to allow your body to recover a little bit better, and not be constantly bombarded by cortisol and whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. Totally agree. Yeah. Did we cover anything else? Was there any other tests there? So nutrient biomarkers, I think those are important ones. I think I used to run an essential fatty acid ratio on everybody, and I really found that everybody was out of balance on it unless they were actually taking an omega-3 supplement, usually a fish oil or a good quality algae oil or something along those lines. But I actually just stopped running them because I know you're out of balance pretty much if you're not taking it to some point. And the problem is that if you take the first form of it, like
AJ?
the original omega-3, like from the plants, most people don't convert it very effectively. And I was working with the yoga community for quite a while, and I saw a lot of people that were vegans, and I would have couples coming in that were both on a strong vegan diet, and it's really individual, because I would find one of them would actually be doing really well on it, and even in their omega-3, they were converting their plant omegas over to higher up the chain, what we would call like a fish oil, like an EPA or DHA. They would actually be in a pretty good zone. I'm like, that's awesome. Then I checked the other one and they'd be like way out of balance, but they were eating more or less the same diet. So this is why sometimes it helps to test things, because now at the same point, that person was also getting a lot more symptoms. She was getting a lot of more joint and aches and skin and hair changes and some of these different things that would tell me about a fatty acid imbalance. And it could vary from person to person. So I'll find that with like vitamin D. Some people are doing exactly the same thing or even taking the same dose, but when I check it, one person's actually right up there in the right zone and the other person's really low. Like they just might need more. Their body doesn't convert it over as well or store it as well or absorb it as well. So that's where the testing part is helpful, because it just helps to really see like where are you right now and how do we what's sort of the low-hanging fruit that we can address right away.
What's the time frame for follow-up testing then? Like how long do you want to see these interventions in place and to see the person
integration time?
Yeah, integration time.
Yeah.
What would you say follow-up would be?
It varies on the nutrient, but I would say most of the time, if we ran some tests to see where people were at, usually again within probably 4 to 6 months is a good time frame to relook at some of the stuff. Like if someone's say low in iron, for example, usually takes about 3 months at a pretty good dose to get you up. Same with like B12, probably about 2 to 3 months to start to rebuild levels. But again, I've seen it vary from person to person depending on just how well they absorb and all the different factors that play into it. But I would usually do it and then probably follow up again in about within 6 months to check to see where they are. And, even with something like vitamin D, I guess chances are if you're not taking it, you're low, especially now, because you just won't make it until probably we hit around May. But for people that are really low, you can give them a pretty aggressive dose to get them back up over the course of a month, right? And then just drop it down. And most of the time, I've kind of found like after a while working with so many people, you know what to kind of give people to get into a zone and then to kind of maintain there after. But I still think generally within about 6 months, it's good to recheck stuff just to see that you're on the right track.
Nice, nice.
Did we say CBC, like a regular blood test? We could do that for a baseline, or do you want? I don't know if that's in your book or not, but it's a baseline.
Yeah, CBC is just a good baseline. I think it just sort of gives people an overall look at red and white blood cells and what's going on. It's a pretty basic panel, but it will tell you if there's any big things going on like anemias or certain blood pathologies or something. So that's a standard one though that you would get on a routine physical. So anytime you go see your doctor, you usually get like a CBC and you get, you know, probably your liver and your kidney enzymes and you kind of look at some of those markers. And it's a basic profile, but it doesn't look at any of the functional kind of markers that we had talked about in the previous episode. That usually you have to go over and above that, unless you've got a functional med doctor that's aware of it and that they are looking at it.
Nice. So that's the testing part done. So maybe we can just go baseline of what people can do just to be more healthy at home. If they're not, they obviously it's never a bad idea to go get testing done. But there's other ways just to determine or things we can talk about just to be healthy, right? We kind of mentioned a little bit before, but maybe we can zone into that a bit more. Does that make sense? As in, like, we talked about dietary stuff, but like maybe eating a balanced diet, like the 80-20 rule, like things you can do. If you want to get healthy at home, what can you do today? Well, you can start eating better, right? That's a surefire way to be healthier, is just to follow that 80-20 principle, right? Like you said, Jay, I think you said, like, just reflect. What are you currently doing? Look in the mirror, right? Are you maintaining a healthy body weight? If you're not, that's usually indicative of a few things. You need to either eat better, and probably in combination with getting more regular physical activity, right? So those are kind of simple strategies that people can do at home to start trying to get healthier.
It's
Better.
really just getting aware first, like
Yeah.
one I think about even with inflammation, it's like notice when you wake up in the morning, when you're looking at in the mirror, like are your rings tighter on your hands? Do you feel like you got a little layer of fluid underneath your skin? I mean, I know that depending on what I'm eating, I will notice differences like that the following day. And if you stop and pay attention to it and actually really sort of focus in, you'll notice, I mean, you'll notice that. Or if you're getting more joint pains one day than another, because you were talking about diet, and diet is just such it's a big one that affects so many different things. And a lot of times I think people should just, do try and do something like an elimination diet or like an autoimmune paleo diet or something like that for a bit, just to see how they feel after about a month of eating that way, because a lot of times a lot of symptoms just disappear because you're not triggering it ongoingly.
For sure.
I like the awareness thing, because obviously that's and most people come in all seriousness, like we see it all the time, where they not even aware of the fact that those symptoms aren't normal.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's really key to teach them and educate them about, waking up like that isn't normal. It's not because of necessarily you're getting older. That is that is such a common excuse for all these things. But yeah, so I like that fact that it's really just taking note of that. It's not normal that I go to bed for 8 hours and I wake up and I'm exhausted. So these are all indicators too that things are askew at some level. So it's just to see, like, well, what is it exactly, like you're saying about waking up and feeling swollen, to all these things of doing an activity and being completely burnt after and or sore the next day, that you have a hard time walking. Well, these are a lot of indicators of inflammatory conditions and things like that. So yeah, it's just to be aware of, like, what am I experiencing that is not comfortable and or helping me in what I want to do and what I want to achieve, and then go from there on breaking it down to see what might be the cause from that, which is some of the things we discussed before about how to find them. But the key starts with being aware. Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah, you'll find that with lots of stuff. It's It's like just because it's familiar doesn't mean that it's the way it's supposed to be, even if it's been familiar for years and years, right? Like I'll see people and they're like, well, it's normal for me to not have a bowel movement for 3 or 4 days. It's been like that for years. It's not really optimal though. Like that might be causing some other troubles. But it's just that that's what that routine has been like. And I remember having one kid in that was for ADHD, and not that I'm a really big fan of those diagnoses, but it sort of wraps up how he was feeling. And when his nervous system actually was able to come right back down to where it should be, and that was through doing something called heart rate variability monitoring, and getting him actually down. And it was just like, holy cow, this is what I'm supposed to feel like? Like, he did not know what his nervous system was supposed to be like because he had always been riding up here. And sometimes you'll find like certain imbalances can cause you to be kind of revved right up here. And that's all you've known. And you don't know until you actually get a chance to kind of come out of it. And then we can start to sort of reverse engineer that to figure out how to start to support that. But normal or familiar is not a good representation of whether or not you are functioning optimally. So sometimes you have to do some of these different things to just see. It's why diet, for example, if you do that, you might find that you feel dramatically different after about 6 weeks of changing your diet up substantially. And a lot of these symptoms that you just thought were normal just started to disappear, right? Maybe certain aches start to disappear, or chronic headaches start to go away, or your energy starts to spike up, you sleep better, whatever it might be. And all you did was one major thing, but it just had so many trickle effects. So that gives people a new set point to now, observe what they feel like when they're not under this excess load of stuff. And that's what I think is really important, is that if people can get out of that excess load, that's where they start to really change their health, because most people don't really even know what healthy is supposed to feel like because they've got so many other logs in the fire that are causing troubles.
I like what you just said there. It's not so much what more can I do, it's maybe what can I remove from my lifestyle. So maybe, you're doing too much, but in the case of food, oftentimes it's just like, I love the Whole30. I recommend it to people all the time because it's just a well thought out, they're removing kind of any, processed refined sugars, alcohol, and just like you say, it's like the body when you remove those things, and the first 2 weeks are hard, and then eventually you get to the 2 weeks, and all of a sudden these people, like you say, it's just, wow, my sleep's improved, my bowel movements are normal, my
Energy levels are better.
energy, yeah, and you're not taking, you're not adding things, because oftentimes it's like, oh, work out more, do this, more sleep, more this. It's like, no, just take out a few things and see how you feel.
Well, it's interesting alcohol, because that's been the biggest thing that came out here in Canada, a month and a half ago, where the whatever federal agency it is has now reduced the number of drinks that's considered healthy per week. Yeah, I think it was up to 15 for men and up to 10 for women weekly, I believe. And they changed it to two or less per week. And I've had several clients come in and say, can you believe this? Like 2 a week? Are you kidding me? That's my hockey night, and they're saying like how much of a struggle that's going to be. And I've had some good conversations on that with them, saying, well, you never know. Like certainly 15 doesn't sound optimal,
Alcohol is a funny one. It's like, there was a lot of research pulling in, trying to show how alcohol can be beneficial. It's like, oh, it can help to lower cortisol levels and could do, but it's like, it's just funny because it's like, I think it's because it's a big industry. So it's like, let's try, and people like it and all this. And it's like, let's try and see, there's resveratrol and wine and all these things. And bottom line is alcohol is not a health food. So it's like, if you want to have alcohol, it's for fun and it's for enjoyment, and you can have like some social health maybe around that, exactly. Yeah. But it's not a physically healthy thing on your body. And ultimately, you probably could find other ways to have social health that's probably more supportive than alcohol. Doesn't mean I don't like having, a beer or a glass of wine stuff once in a while, but I mean, when we try to categorize and talk about the health benefits of it, I really think we're just kind of leading ourselves astray. And Dr. Amen, the Amen clinics, the brain clinics, he's a big proponent of like, alcohol destroys your brain. Do not do it. So he would say like none, don't have any alcohol. So
you could probably see like a neutralizing effect again when in Rome, right? When you're on, when you're in the right setting with the right people, like it's probably, everything kind of cancels each other out if it's not in excess, right?
Yeah.
And it adds to the mood, the environment, and the but it's definitely not a health food, right?
My oldest son just did a project on the nervous system in grade 9, and he said, "Daddy, look at this. Look at the effects of alcohol in the brain or drugs on the brain." He goes, "You should not have wine on the weekend. Like it shows like black spots." And I'm like, "Yeah, I hear you. I hear you."
That old commercial. This is your brain. This is your brain.
Yeah.
Any
Totally.
questions? Right?
But he was shocked to see it, right? Because until you see it in front of you, he's like, "Wow, like that's it's a pretty powerful
There's
message."
probably been lots of lobbying over the years to, like you say, to as we saw with the cigarette
With cigarettes, yeah.
25 years, surgeons knew. They're like, wait a second, there's like a 1 in 4 chance that you're gonna have,
Well,
you're
and
gonna
you'd have
end up
actually, and that's when you'd have doctors like Camel, the #1 doctor choice
Yeah, yeah.
cigarette.
Yeah,
So it's like, that was all. That was all
and then
there.
the surgeons, the surgeons that are like performing the surgery are like, oh, wait a second, I didn't sign up for that. And then 25 years later, once the dust settles, like, oh, and by the way,
2 more ways of being healthy.
Yeah.
Might want to stop.
Yeah.
Drinking a lot. Might want to consume less.
there you go.
Yeah. Those are the really low hanging fruit.
Yes.
But sometimes, those are the hardest ones because it's like most people know, I think, in some regard, what is sort of healthy and what's not. I don't think it's so much. I mean, people need it sometimes structured. They need a little bit of like okay, what am I to do? Because there's so much information. Where should I start? So I think it helps to structure for people. But I think ultimately a lot of people know certain things that are actually healthy. So when you're trying to get into, why don't you do it? Right? That's a whole different conversation. It's like when you make changes, it's usually because you no longer resonate with that specific activity anymore. So something shifts kind of higher up and then it just no longer fits anymore. It's like fast food. You can love fast food for a period of time until you just decide it grosses me out now, right? That could be a point where someone just hits it. It doesn't have to be a totally conscious choice. Sometimes it's no longer something that I want anymore. Right. Or like when I see people that quit smoking, the people that really did well with it usually was like, I did it and then it was done. It was like, it was cold turkey and it wasn't even hard for them. They didn't even go through even like a lot of addiction with it. So sometimes I think it's these real changes, they happen when we arrive at a place where we are really ready for them to happen, and trying to force it too much. I just find like, it's like weight. It's like, how many times do you just flip back and forth and do something and then fall off of it? Because I just don't think we're totally in alignment with that change yet. And once it happens, then I think it naturally falls into our behaviors and actions anyways.
It's normally when people figure out why they were doing it in the first place. That's when the most success of letting it go comes, right?
That aha moment.
Yeah. It's like, oh man, yeah, that's totally why I have, alcohol or do whatever, like it's, if you can get over those things for sure, then obviously better mental health and better decisions, but it can bring you to a better place where you could be a little more optimal,
Yeah, so I think that probably covers most of the stuff there. Probably what we'll have to do at some point is maybe even do an episode. We'll talk around even like healthy weight, maintaining healthy weight, different strategies around that, because that kind of gets even talking about like being metabolically fit. Like, what do we do to actually ensure that starts to happen, and some strategies around that. So, for anybody listening, if there's certain information that you want to know, write it in and we will put together some episodes on it. And I think we're probably even going to do some stuff where we'll talk about like our top 3 suggestions and see where we overlap. Not talk about it ahead of time and see where we overlap and what's different, so you guys get some different feedback from each one of us.
Awesome. Sounds awesome.
All right, boys. Awesome seeing you again.
You too.
Healthy versus fit, not the same thing.
No,
Not at all.
Check it out.
See you later.